Evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's General Purposes Committee. I'm your chair, Councillor Kamaljeet Kaur Nagpal. I'm just going to start by doing a roll call to make sure everyone is here who should be. Councillor Rice.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Aslam, I believe, has sent his apologies. Councillor Ball.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Deer. Councillor Deer has also sent his apologies. Councillor Rooney.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Shaw.
Present, Chair, yes, thank you.
Councillor Sumner.
Present, Chair. Good evening.
Councillor Taylor.
Taylor's there. He's muted.
We can see you, Councillor Taylor.
Yes, but you're muted, Councillor Taylor.
Sorry.
It's better.
All day speaking.
Right, you've got to say present.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. Dippy Chowdhury.
Present, Chair.
Ian Patterson.
Present, Chair.
Now to the order of business. So apologies for absence we've covered. Any urgent matters? Any declarations of interest? Any matters to be considered in private? Minutes of the last meeting. Can we agree the minutes, please?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yes, they're agreed, Chair.
Chair, you keep on fading out.
Oh.
I'm sorry, you've gone again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you when you say, can you hear me? And then we can...
Right. Okay, hopefully that's better. Right, okay, so the next item is item 6. I'm just going to introduce the officers who are here with us tonight. We have with us this evening Helen Harris, Director of Legal and Democratic Services, Adam Wally, Assistant Director of Capital Investment Programme, Jackie Adams, Head of Legal, Property and Regulatory, Shabana Kauser, Assistant Director, Strategic and Corporate Finance. And I'm not sure if Andrew's with us, but I'll introduce him anyway. Andrew Parsons, Interim Programme Manager. But before we go on to item 6, we do have with us this evening Carolyn Brown from the Friends of Victoria Hall. Carolyn, you have 5 minutes to speak. I think Keith will do the timer, please.
Thank you,
Muted,
Chair.
Keith.
Are we okay?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I will be timing it, but I won't display the timer.
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead when you want to start, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm here to speak on behalf of the Friends of Victoria Hall, whose aim is to ensure a secure future for the Victoria Hall complex so that the whole community can continue to use all of it. I've been a resident of Ealing for 49 years. My own personal memories of Victoria Hall relate predominantly to political meetings when the council has wanted to update the community on issues, and notably when Sebastian Coe came to tell us on behalf of the International Olympics Committee how we in Ealing would benefit from the 2012 legacy. I've been concerned about what the council has been trying to do to the halls and the trust ever since 2015, when it first announced a plan to sell off the town hall. As you know, in this sell-off, the council included property that it did not own, property that is owned by the Victoria Hall Trust and is held in trust on behalf of the community for whose use it's always intended. Sorry, I've moved it. I'm talking to you not as councillors, but as trustees of the charity which owns the Victoria and Princess Halls and associated support spaces. If you're an independently minded or an independent trustee, I'd like you to take particular note. This evening, you should think very carefully about what you're being asked to do. In particular, you're being asked to approve what is being presented to you with the officer's report as draft trust accounts for 2019-2020. The council officers have indeed produced some figures for the year 2018 to 2019. Look at them carefully. As you know, the council has failed to produce separate accounts for the trust property for quite some time. In fact, until 2017, when the council was made aware by a member of the public that the Victoria Hall Trust was still extant. So there is scant evidence to support the current account's apparent assertion that the trust properties are not viable as a separate going concern. Ever since 2016, July 2016, when the council signed an agreement to sell off property it did not own, the figures it has produced have been designed to undermine the perfectly reasonable idea that the Victoria Hall and associated properties could function independently and profitably if they were properly managed and marketed. And so we read on page 20 of the council officer's report to you that the draft accounts confirm that the estimated historic net deficit position of the trust is continuing. So these accounts have been a long time coming. They made their first appearance in draft form 21 months ago at the 16th of April 2019 GPC meeting. Sorry, it's gone again. Just look at what's happened in the near 2 years it's taken to prepare them. The costs allocated to the trust have risen from £282,380 to £358,091. What's more, these numbers raise serious questions about how the halls have been run. Thousands of pounds spent on photocopying and yet nothing on marketing. And out of the woodwork, there's a £45,000 bill for something called irrecoverable VAT. This is unexplained, but whatever it is, why has it only just been discovered? It's clearly part of an everything including the kitchen sink operation to load up the trust with as many costs as can be got away with. The other reason you're getting figures like this to approve can be deduced from page 10 of the minutes of last month's meeting. The higher the hall's losses can be made to look, the more that will be taken off the trust share of any premium yielded from an eventual Mastercraft deal. The way these accounts have been prepared provides a perfect illustration of the conflict of interest that has held back the proper stewardship of the halls for decades, and now looks like it could result in the loss to the people of Ealing of ownership and the use of an important community asset. We have grave concerns about the validity of these accounts. Friends of Victoria Hall have submitted a comprehensive and detailed list of questions about these accounts to the chair and committee and to the officer concerned. You should ensure that all of these questions have been addressed to your satisfaction before approving the accounts. It is essential to protect the interests of the trust beneficiaries, and by law, that is the responsibility of the trustees. That is you. So 2 questions you should be asking yourself in this meeting as trustees. Am I really going to approve the draft trust accounts for 2019-2020? Have I really acted in the best interest of the beneficiaries of the Victoria Hall Trust? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So item 6, I'm now going to...
I
Very
can't hear you,
quiet,
I'm
Chair.
afraid.
Yep, you faded out, Councillor Noble.
Item 6, I'm now going to hand over to Adam.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors and colleagues. Thanks, Chair. So bear with me a moment. I'm just going to open up I'm trying to multitask here, trying to open up a presentation at the same time, which hopefully is coming up on screens at your end. If somebody wouldn't mind just confirming they can see this.
Yeah, we got it.
Thank you. So good evening, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. Just briefly, you'll probably know me by now. I'm Adam Wally. I'm Assistant Director for Capital Investment. I'm, as you'll be aware from previous meetings, I've been asked to act on behalf of the Trust. I'm an officer of the Council, but I'm not involved directly in the Mastercraft deal or the kind of the Council side of that project. So what for this evening we've thought might be helpful would be myself and my colleague Shabana, who I'll be handing over to in a minute to talk through some of the detail, have pulled together a short presentation. We thought it might be a helpful way of sort of structuring and trying to respond to some of the questions you might have in advance. I think probably before I dive into the presentation, I'll just sort of start by saying we've obviously got I think there's 5 recommendations in the report being put to you this evening, and I'm going to suggest that we probably spend certainly the first part of the meeting, Chair, and this presentation, the recommendations 1.1 to 1.4 are all concerned with the accounts and putting a set of draft accounts before you as trustees for your review, and there's a number of follow-on recommendations that are related to those. And then we also have a final recommendation 1.5, which, as you'll probably have read from the way it's worded, was a relatively late addition, which was as a consequence of the Charity Commission's response coming in sort of very soon before the deadline to publish this report to you. So, Chair, we suggest if you're in agreement that the way to structure this might be to cover off recommendations 1.1 to 1.4 and then 1.5 separately, which we can come on to. So as I say, if I could just kick us off, and obviously aware of Carolyn Brown's statement there, which hopefully thanks to the Friends of Victoria Hall was sent in advance, and we also received the Friends list of detailed questions on the account. So this presentation has been put together with those in mind, appreciating that members of trust members may have similar questions. So again, hopefully we'll look to cover those. As I say, I'll hand over to Shabana in a minute, who's probably going to cover off a lot of the, well, certainly we'll be covering off more of the kind of the technical detail, I suppose, of this, but I'm just going to do a quick introductory slide, which just sort of introduces the item. So that the first thing to say, as you'll be aware, is that what's presented to you in the report is a summary and set of draft accounts for the Victoria Hall Trust over the periods 2019 and 2020, and there's also an adjustment reported to the previous year, the 2018-2019 year. I should add that regrettably there was an error in the initial set of accounts that was circulated a week ago. It was purely just an unintentional error, so sincere apologies for that, but we have amended those accounts and corrected that error, and an amended version was recirculated earlier today. And again, if anyone's got any questions on that, we can obviously look to address those. In terms of the period that we are talking about on the accounts, clearly that is a period that is during the council's management of the trust assets on behalf of the trust, and obviously it is the case that the council has managed the trust assets as a part of a wider piece, which is Ealing Town Hall, and therefore the way that the accounts are presented is as a proportion of both the income and expenditure for the town hall as an entirety has been allocated to the trust. And Shabana will talk in a bit more detail in a minute about that. But in summary, the methodology that's been applied is to use the same set of assumptions that were the case for the 2018-19 account. So again, we can go into a bit more detail on that, but just to summarise that up front. Very last point from me before I hand over to Shabana is just to say that trustees will be aware that the period that we're talking about in terms of the accounts, the 2019-2020 year was the period in which we were, or the council, I should say, was seeking to decommission the town hall in anticipation of potentially the project moving into the next phase, the Mastercraft redevelopment. And there is a reflection of that in the income. Clearly, it takes us just up to, but not quite into the point, obviously, of March, April last year, where COVID hit. So obviously, those accounts will come at a later date. So hopefully that's a helpful summary of what we hope to cover through this presentation. And Shabana, if you're there, I'll hand over to you at this point, onto the next slide, and tell me when you want me to move on.
Thank you, Adam. If you could, good evening, councillors. As Adam has set out in his summary, I will just go through key elements of the accounts and provide the basis of how the accounts have been prepared, but also kind of give a summary for each of the years that are being reported. So starting with 1819, Ealing Town Hall overall had closed at a net deficit, in-year deficit position of 486,000. This is not reflective of all costs that are incurred by the council in running the Ealing Town Hall, which will therefore exclude support services and certain central overheads. The trust's proportion of that deficit, which we'll kind of run through, is about 156,000 for that year, and included within that year is a provision that's been set aside of 46,000 for a potential VAT liability. Now, the VAT liability is in relation to the cost share and the hall hire and the management and administration. As previously, the trust accounts or income and expenditure was recorded as an internal services, that didn't come up as an issue when the last draft accounts were presented. Following on from recommendation from Charity Commission requiring the council to prepare a separate set of charity accounts, this then comes into play about VAT and in terms of the cost share having a VAT element or not. As a prudent financial assumption, a provision has been made in the accounts, and that's just to kind of ensure that when we are reporting the draft accounts, you kind of know all the liabilities they may be potentially due. We are seeking specialist advice on this VAT issue. So hopefully upon conclusion, a decision could be made whether there is a liability or not. And if a decision, and we're hoping for an optimal and a beneficial decision to ensure that we're not adding additional costs, but unfortunately VAT it's very technical and it has a set of accounting rules that we have to kind of comply with for HMRC. If it is proven that the liability is no longer required, it will just be removed from the final submitted accounts. If the liability is due, we will just need to, based on the advice, work out exactly how much it is. But for now, is an estimated 46,000 for 1819, and anything prior to that for up to 6 years, which the HMRC could ask us to charge the trust for. Adam, do you mind moving to the next slide, please? For 1920, Ealing Town Hall again closed at a in-year net deficit of 633,000. The net deficit obviously was higher because it was less income compared to the year before. The trust accounted for about 171,000 of the deficit in that year. The cost share proportions on which the split has been made is on the same basis as 1819, which I'll run through in the next couple of slides. At the end of 1920, the trust was holding overall a deficit of 327. Now that 327 takes into account the in-year 1920 deficit of 171 and previously the one that we just accounted 1890, but nothing further or older than at this point in time than 1819 accounts. The 1920 trust deficit includes, again, a small provision. It's just for that year of £3,000 of potential VAT liability. Excuse me. Again, following the specialist advice that we will kind of hopefully get soon, we'll kind of determine if this liability is actually going to be realised or it can be removed from the accounts. Adam, do you mind? So the next couple of slides are just going to explain the income and the cost share, how that's kind of being determined. So just as a summary, all costs with the exception of event staff, security and cleaning are based on a 20% proportion, which is historically been agreed based on floor area, while event staff, security and cleaning costs have been split on the income proportion generated, as these are mostly staff related and are linked to rooms. The income itself is based on actual collection of the room booking. So it's wherever the room bookings were for each of the trusted room is what's been accounted for. So there is no split based on actual room booking detail. Staff costs basically comprise of the events team managing and administering the room bookings and marketing it. The costs include are reflective of the cost that the council has to pay for the staff, which is inclusive of apprentice levy, and an apprentice levy is a on cost for the council, and hence it's an element of the cost charge. Utilities and general costs, this predominantly, as it says, includes utilities, business rates, a proportion of which is payable by the trust, and again that proportion is based on the 20%. Sorry, Adam, thank you. Business rates, under the current rating law, sorry,
I think keep going, Shabana. I think it was the background noise.
Okay, sorry. Under the current rating law, where the property is not split, we're not able to assess the trustee's room separately, as is unable to do so through the valuation. Hence, the full charge is to the owner, and in this case it's the council, so the full liability is charged with the council, and no rate relief can therefore be applied. The same applies to a bid levy. A bid levy is an additional cost on top of the business rates for a particular area, and for obviously Ealing Town Hall comes into a bid area for which it gets a charge, and again a proportion of that is added in. Core operating costs include reactive and planned maintenance, as well as security and cleaning. And as I've said previously, the security and cleaning are based on a slightly different proportion, not on the area, the 20% share, but instead a proportion of the income. Other costs include any minor repairs, which in 1920 there weren't any, but there was some small amount in the year before. Other fixed costs that are applicable to Ealing Town Hall, for which you will get charged for, and also the provision of the irrecoverable VAT is currently sitting under the other costs heading. The accounts themselves have been prepared on an accrual basis, hence requiring for the backdated provision for VAT to be included in the 1819 accounts for that reason, because it's been recognised, and as yet we haven't finalised the accounts. We're required to recognise it in the year it relates to. The accounts format, which is being set out in Appendix 2, is updated and provided using the proforma from Charity Commission, so to ensure that it complies with the charity accounting regulations. Council officers, and that would be myself, we prepare, I prepare the financial accounts independently from the council's main accounts, as I have I don't get involved in preparation of those. We have followed due process to ensure independent, transparent and fair process, like we would do with some of our other company processes that the council kind of gets itself involved with. The trust has an option to appoint an independent firm for preparing the accounts and undertaking an audit, but an agreement will need to be sought on how it will go about funding this, in light of the fact that the council currently doesn't charge or provide the accountancy support at no cost, and any additional costs will all they will be doing is adding to the deficit. The account submission process, so the 18 and 19 and 1920 accounts will be submitted as soon as we've clarified and sought decision with regard to VAT provision and a couple of technical accounting adjustments as prescribed by the charity accounting regulations and guidance. Those technical adjustments should have no impact on the overall outturn, but if they do, we will kind of provide that to through the final accounts. As part of the recommendation in the report is that we would be seeking for an independent review to be undertaken just once the accounts have been finalized. This is just to kind of provide assurance of the process, and is because it's the first set of official accounts that will be being submitted on behalf of the trust.
I think that's back to me, Shabana. Thank you very much for that, and thanks trustees for bearing with us. I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear the last slide. I appreciate it's a fairly wordy presentation. There's quite a lot of technical detail that we did want to get through there. So thanks, Shabana, for that summary. So as I say, a final slide before we hand back to you, Chair, for any questions. But in summary, as Shabana's just summarised there, we are indicating that the Ealing Town Hall as an entirety continues to operate at a deficit, and as a consequence, the trust component of that does too. And as Shabana's outlined there, there is a cumulative deficit currently being presented of £327,000 covering both of those years. Recommendation 1.3 of the report sort of refers to this, which is to say that we haven't yet reached a sort of an agreement between the trust and the council on how that deficit's to be treated. So one of the elements of the report before you this evening seeks your authority to give me the powers to proceed in making those arrangements with colleagues on the council side. As we've said, as Shabana's gone through the methodology there, the accounts are presented to you in draft form, and obviously we can go through any questions trustees may like to put to us this evening. And obviously adjustments can be made. It's essentially a model that's been applied and a set of assumptions, as I said earlier. The methodology is effectively been carried forward from the previous year that was presented to you back in, I think, April 2019. As a sort of an example of that, and I know it's one of the questions that the Friends of Victoria Hall raised, there is potentially a discussion to be had about the trust floor area and whether 20% is the right approach. We've run some modelling on that, and I suppose the main thing to say on that, and as an example, is that clearly if it were agreed that the trust proportion of the town hall were less than that would reduce the costs, the overheads to the trust. But the main thing to emphasise to you is that it wouldn't eliminate the deficit. It would simply reduce it somewhat marginally. So just a sort of key points throughout there. Just another sort of unfortunately fairly negative point perhaps to end the presentation on is obviously, as I said earlier, the accounts don't take into account the year that we're currently in. And clearly the impact of COVID is going to be another potential challenge that we'll have to face in terms of the level of income, the severe sort of impact that COVID has had on the level of income that the town hall's generated. The report that I presented to you does have some figures on usage through the COVID period, which follows on from a question that was raised at the last meeting. And the very last point from me, Chair, before I hand back to you, and as Shabana's mentioned there, recommendation 1.4 does seek your approval to potentially look at appointing an independent review of these accounts. Again, we are aware of the perceived conflict of interest point, and I think on that basis we would like to look to arrange that with your agreement. So, Chair, I hope that's a helpful summary, and I'll hand back to you at that point, and I'll stop sharing the presentation.
Thank you, Adam and Shabana. That was a very helpful presentation. Are there any questions from members?
Yes, please, Chair. I tried to put it in the chat, but I don't know if it actually went through. But with your permission, can I ask a question?
I can't see it in the chat, but please do indicate in the chat if you'd like to ask a question. But yeah, carry on, Councillor Sumner.
My question is about 1.5, which is the next. Do you want to take that now?
We'll focus on 1.1 to 1.4 for now on the account, and then we'll come on to that one afterwards. Councillor Sumner, thank you. Councillor Ball.
Sorry. Yeah, so thank you. A couple of questions on the accounts. So some of the biggest figures are the staff costs in a couple of categories. So I was wondering why the staff costs reduced so much between 1819 and 1920. Is it a question of people being allocated to other jobs due to COVID, or has the permanent staffing reduced, just to sort of think in terms of how it would affect things going forward? And then also the security cost is very high, over £200,000 each year. Obviously, I can understand if the building is very busy and there are multiple additional security guards needed for large events, I can understand a very large security bill. But in the current circumstances, it's difficult to understand. You know, when essentially there's one security guard there permanently, and then you have another one in at the moment, for instance, for the vaccinations and so on. But there's not an enormous number of security guards there. I can't see how it adds up to 200,000 a year, but it's helpful to have some sort of breakdown of how that works. Thanks.
Shabana, are you able to talk to those questions?
Yeah, it's just, so do remind me, sorry, Constable, if I miss anything, so I'll just take through your points. Around obviously the event staff, so those are the actual costs. So I think there were some vacancies held within 1920, and hence why the costs would have reduced. I can't comment on as the detail or the operation of the events team, but we can kind of look into it to kind of get a more of a sufficient answer that will kind of hopefully provide in as part of after the meeting. But as far as I understand, the actual costs are in relation to what was actually paid, and there were some vacancies held within 1920, and some of it probably would be due to the fact that, as Adam had alluded, that the team, Ealing Town Hall was looking at potential closure, so there would have been some decisions made to either, reduce staffing costs either through redeploying them elsewhere or keeping elements vacant. But as I said, we will need to kind of formally provide that detail once I can kind of ask the officers involved. With regards to security, as I understand, the security in 1920 was still there. There were I would say, 24-hour plus weekend security, and it's a cost of security officers and shift allowances that are fixed, and obviously the weekend cover. So hence you see them not really changing between 1819 and 1922 much, or the year before. Going forward, as you've kind of alluded to, in 2021, most of it has been shut due to COVID. So there may be, we should see a reduction of those, but I can't necessarily comment on what those costs would look like, as I have not seen them myself. Sorry, did I answer the 2 points that you had raised?
Yeah. I think, with your permission, Chair, I think it would be helpful to have detail after the meeting on both of those points, really. So on what the staffing situation going forward is, and also a bit more of a breakdown on security, because if it's the case that because less events are there should be a reduction security. We should have already been seeing that in the 1920 figures and don't seem to have done. So it would be helpful to have more of an understanding on that. Please, thank you.
Chair, if I may, I'm certainly happy to take away those questions, Councillor Ball, and I will pose those to colleagues, and I understand why you're asking, and it's a valid question. So I will take those away. Chair, you've gone quiet again.
Oh no, I've gone quiet again.
You're back, I think.
Ian Addison.
Yeah, thanks. A few questions. Starting with business rates, I was slightly surprised to see words to the effect that rates are levied in an area part of the town hall which we're unable to, sorry if I've got this wrong, unable to separately identify or separate. I mean, given that we've been able to identify the curtilage, the square meterage of the trust property for a variety of purposes, why is that not possible for business rates? And has any thought been given either in the past or for the future to applying for charitable business rate relief? Secondly, the apprentice levy, I was surprised to see there, which seems to be a straight pass-through overhead from the council. Again, slightly surprising that it's passed through to us, given that, to my knowledge, the trust doesn't actually employ any staff or apprentices. So perhaps a bit of explanation around that, or even some assurance that if any money flowing back from the apprentice levy, the trust would get its share of. I think the other concern I have is obviously whatever the figures turn out to be, we're kind of racking up an amount of money against whatever share of premium the trust is likely to get, and I wonder if there's any indication kind of where we stand in relation to that, and what the council in its corporate financial capacity, what position they will take in terms of repayment, i.e. all at once over a period of time. Is interest due to be applied, and how will that be handled technically? And I think finally, just to endorse the proposal that I think we ought to have that independent review. The terms will be important, so again, could I ask not just checking, if you like, the arithmetic, but also some review of how kind of sound and appropriate the methodology is. And finally, you will have seen quite a detailed set of questions from the Friends, which I started working through and acknowledge it is very detailed. And I just wonder whether it's worth ensuring that we are able to do some form of kind of point-for-point reply to that before we finally sign off these accounts. I mean, we have been kind of awaiting them for a while, and I don't think a short period further would kind of harm. So if we can give kind of full clarity and assurance to everybody concerned. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Ian. Yes, Siobhan, I was going to ask, would you mind doing the first 2 points?
Yes, I was going to say, if I do the first two, and then if you can come in. With regards to business rates valuation and on which a charitable relief can be applied isn't same as recognizing there's a floor space and it could be split. It's under the valuation regulations, and we have sought clarification, and we've done this previously with the rateable values team. The valuation cannot independently value it because there are rooms within a big building and they can't themselves be cordoned off or have a different access point in which they can be valued as, and hence why that they haven't been valued separately. This may not be an issue potentially going forward when we kind of go into a new on a new site. So I think the issue from a historic perspective and what we can do with the Ealing Town Hall, we've been formally advised by the Revenues team in accordance with the valuation regulations for business rates that this can't be kind of split through, hence why the cost can't be reduced, and the cost that the council is incurring is the full cost for the town hall, for which a proportion based on square footage has been charged across. The bid levy, it is a levy based on rateable value, and it is a legitimate business rates cost that for a particular area that would have been voted for to take into that levy, which is a small proportion that's kind of being charged across. It's not as large as the business rates cost, but you know, understandably it's still a cost, but it's applying the same basis. With regards to apprentice levy, it is a on cost to the council, so it's a taxation we pay like national insurance or pension towards employing staff, and as it is a cost that we incur as part of the for those staff, that charge has been included, and it is not necessarily linked to whether the trust employs or not. The trust is asking the council to administer and manage the halls for them, and part of that includes the staffing cost proportion, which includes the apprentice levy cost that we kind of pay for. And yes, if there are benefits, a refund or element, we will kind of account for it. But as far as I'm aware, those have not yet kind of flown through. I think the next points are for yourself. I don't know.
Yeah, thanks, Shabana. So thanks for those, and thanks for your questions, Ian. I think so. In terms of your third, fourth, and fifth, I think there was a note there and two questions possibly. But in terms of, as you've sort of said there, and in terms of the kind of the position of the council's position on the deficit, as you rightly flagged, that we don't yet, as a trust, have an arrangement with the council for how that is to be dealt with, and hence recommendation 1.3 of the report is seeking your approval to give me the authority to discuss that with the council and look to have an arrangement in place. So what I would suggest on that one, obviously I understand your concern there about it. I'd look to come back to you at a later date with subject to your agreeing that recommendation. I'd look to come back to you with a subsequent report which would detail where the trust and the council stand on that point. I think I heard your fourth point was more of just a note, your endorsement of the independent review. You mentioned about the terms of that review. I may have missed it, and feel free to sort of just clarify if what you're asking was for some sort of involvement in sort of shaping the scope of that. I'm sure that's something we could look to do if that's the ask. And lastly, your point around the response to the Friends and point by point reply. Again, if that's, I think Shabana and I had, as I said earlier, we'd looked, albeit at a sort of a summary level, to try to address a number of those points in the presentation, but certainly can look to do a more comprehensive reply to those comments and take that as an action on officers from this meeting.
Just very briefly, if I can, Chair. Yes, I'm not necessarily looking to get involved in the briefing. Just some assurance that the independent review will look at the basis of the methodology and not just, in a sense, check the arithmetic. Because I think that's important. Not least because what we agree or don't agree on this first set of accounts is really going to set quite a strong precedent for how we go forward for quite a long time. And it's important that everyone really just has not just transparency, but kind of confidence in the basis of it. So that was the point, basically, like trying to get under the skin of how the approach is constructed, not just kind of ticking off the numbers. But I can leave the detailed briefing. Quite happy to you and the officers, Adam.
Thanks, Ian. And sorry, it just occurred to me, I think there was one other element of your question about charitable status, which I'm not sure if I think I'm right in saying, and again, colleagues might be better placed to advise, but we aren't, I think, as a consequence of us not yet being fully up to date, so to speak, with the Charity Commission. We're not yet in a position as a trust to sort of formally put those sort of arrangements in place. I think I'm right in saying, Shapana or colleagues, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that.
I can only say from a financial perspective. So without the charitable status, any whether that's VAT relief or any other relief can, it could be very difficult to ascertain. But yeah, it's all going to be dependent upon one of your recommendation is to kind of set that governance and that structure in place.
So I think that's back to you, Chair.
Councillor Shaw, you had a question?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. Just in the accounts, I think this is sort of similar to Councillor Ball's questioning, I believe. So I think the answer might come back from there. But just very broadly speaking, the rough proportions of the deficit seem to be running at 32% 2018 and 2019 and 27% 2019, 2020. Of course, the reduction's very welcome. There's no doubt about that in terms of the accrual of the deficit that the trustees are racking up. But I just wondered how that is shared when, generally speaking, the split that's being given is being presented as 20% for the trust, across the board from the council. And that same question as well, one of the questions I had was actually the questions Ian asked about the business rate split. And that, is that effectively, the business rates, is that the 20%? If that could be confirmed on to us, please.
I'll try and answer your question, Councillor Shaw, and do tell me if I've kind of missed any.
I'm really sorry. It could have been a connection issue at mine.
Hello?
Yes,
I'm guessing everybody else can hear me.
I can hear you, Shapana.
And thanks.
Yeah.
Yes, carry on, please. Yeah, thank you. I don't know what that was. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I think your first question was more about the proportion split, really between the two. So, as I said, majority of the operational costs are based on a 20% share, except for some more the staffing element, which is a proportion of the income. So hence overall that 20% isn't kind of necessarily reflective, hence why you get slightly different percentages that are kind of coming through on that basis. And sorry, Councillor Shaw, because I was in my mind before Adam interrupted. What was the other bits of the question, I'm afraid?
It was the business rates and the bid payments there that, could you confirm that the business rates and bid is a sort of straight 20% of the total business rates for the town hall?
Yes, it's straight 20%. The only things that don't have 20% applied to them is the security, cleaning, and the events team.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you. DP Chowdhury.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just wanted some clarification on the staff costs for the figures 18, 19 and 19, 20. I understand the split is generated in terms of the proportion of income raised, but I wondered if it could be explained just how proactive the events team are in marketing the two halls. It's a little unclear that actually the profits are coming through, but just how proactive they are and how much of the work of the marketing of the hall is done by the team and how much just comes in. I'm just wondering how the 36% figure is arrived at, whether that could be reconsidered, looking at how proactive staff are in marketing the halls.
I might, Debbie, thanks for your question. I'll possibly go first. I might defer to colleagues again on that one. I suppose what I'd say, I'm not aware that, or I believe we have an events and hospitality team in the council that would be marketing the town hall in its entirety. So there, again, I imagine I probably would say this on behalf of colleagues, but they're a highly professional, team that have a very strong kind of marketing presence for the town hall in its entirety. I mean, I guess what I'd probably say as far as, it's one of those areas where both the council and the trust are aligned, really, and that we clearly, as or my colleagues, I should say, who have represented the council, have the same interest as the trust in wanting to maximise income. So, again, speaking on behalf of colleagues, I would strongly support that they are a proactive team that are looking to market the town hall in its entirety, and obviously the trust assets benefit from that. I suppose my probably a brief further point on that would be to say that clearly the Victoria Hall and the Prince's Hall, the trust property, are to an extent the sort of jewel in the crown of the town hall, as everyone knows, and obviously are arguably the most attractive parts in terms of lets. So again, our events and marketing team would obviously be wanting to push those on behalf of the trust as much as possible. I don't know if colleagues want to come in further and add anything to what I've said there.
I don't have anything in addition, apart from I was going to say that the council also operates a film unit, which, though isn't managed through the events team, also promote council premises, including the town hall, actively to kind of generate income and to kind of get business within the link. And that's all I can kind of say at the moment. In terms of data, I mean, I don't have it, and I'm sure that if that's required, myself and Adam can relay that back to the events team and see what information can be sought.
Yes, Chair, just to add to points that colleagues have made, the trust benefits from working by aligning its interests in this respect to those of the council. The council has a permanent team. I forget how big it is, as it's reduced slightly in the last year or two, but they have a full-time, the council employs a full-time team of professionals who do nothing but market, let, and let the council's different buildings, and the trust benefits from that. I've seen marketing materials for the trust property, both online and leaflets. I think leaflets are increasingly a bit 20th century, aren't they now? But I've seen some professionally produced photographs of the different rooms within the town hall dressed for marketing purposes. We could, I mean, potentially an item for a future meeting might be a presentation from the head of our halls and events team to talk about what work they do, and how that emphasis. I'm sure they would always welcome ideas, but most of them, as I said, have worked in other places as well and have a professional halls lettings, events management, actually more of an events management background. I don't know, hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Actually, before we get on the next question, just something Helen Harris just mentioned. I'm sure a presentation will be welcome, but just to remind that we need to consider the regulatory elements of our committee at some point as well in the future, not just the Victoria Hall parts of it. On to my questions. And it's been partly answered around the timing of accounts, because if this is the first time, I know the officer did sort of say this is the first time, and noting what Ian's point about how whether we need additional time, so we can understand these accounts more, and is there a time limit before these accounts have to be submitted? Secondly, was in relation to the bid and whether we'd been notified of this before. and what are the benefits of that? I mean, I'm aware we have to pay for it once an area votes for it, but I just wondered if we'd been notified of it before. Adam talked about, I think it's in relation to item 1.3 about how we treat the discussions and how to treat the deficit. Are there particular options there set out? You know, do you need to come back, or is it to us with some various options, or do you have anything in mind? And I suppose the other question is, well, 2 points. One is about the external audit. I'm not sure about the audit at the moment. I'm quite happy. I'm not convinced by that particular argument at the moment. But the other thing was looking at that deficit, and there's a question about how sustainable is it going forward, and I guess that underpins some of the other questions about marketing as well. You know, how can it be successful going forward? That's it.
Well, Chair, if I see Helen, I think has written in and said she might want to comment. If I could possibly, Councillor Taylor, I might defer to Shabana on the time limit point and the bid point. I think before maybe Shabana, if you could cover off those two. I suppose what I'd say on your point, your final point there in terms of sort of ongoing viability, you know, where I'd I suppose come on this is that, you know, this for me is the reason really why I feel you've as trustees reached the resolution to support the council's deal with Marscraft. I mean, under the intention under that arrangement is that the trust would receive would no longer have the liabilities for Victoria Hall that it presently has, and it would have again, it's not for me to sell this to you, but I suppose it's important just to kind of to go over this. That there's an ongoing rental stream from Marscraft that would, part of which would come back to the trust, as well as the trust having no ongoing maintenance liabilities for it, whilst also protecting through the community use protocol the current use by the community of Ealing. So the intention, again, at the moment we're still, and we'll come on later on the agenda to where we are with the Charity Commission, but it remains the plan to work through that process and ultimately for that project to proceed. And obviously the intention is to come, there will be lots of work to be done to sort of properly bring the trust up to date and to bring it to a point where it is forward looking and able to be sustainable and viable post that deal. But as I say, that's I suppose it's another area where I suppose I'd say the council and trust should be aligned really, in that we sort of want the town hall to remain a viable sort of sustainable asset for the council, and that's the proposal the council has developed. In terms of your question about the deficit, I don't, being honest with you, I can't really give you any sort of early steer on that, on where I'm coming from. I do need to have a bit more of an in-depth conversation with colleagues in our finance team, Shabana and others on it. I mean, clearly I imagine there will be, I think Ian touched on it earlier, the question about how it's treated, possibly as a loan, and what sort of rates of interest may or may not be applied to that. I mean, all I would say is as you'll be aware, I have been appointed as the officer representing you as trustees, and I'll look to fight the trustees' corner in those discussions with colleagues, and we'll look to secure the best outcome I'm able to. I'll certainly need to come back to you in due course. I may well want to put some options to you when I've had those more detailed discussions, and obviously we'll look to get your steer on those. Shabana, are you able to just answer Councillor Taylor's questions on the time limit and bid, the bid cost?
Was it bid cost? I thought I think Helen said she will answer the thing around the bid, so I'll touch on it. If it isn't answered, then please do let me know. With regards to the timing of the accounts, obviously Charity Commission, following a confirmation last year in terms of really asking us to produced a set of accounts for the trust independently has given us a little bit of a leeway from a timing perspective, but the timing would be basically linked to ensuring getting the charitable status agreed with Charity Commission. So they will have to work in parallel, and the accounts will need to be at least submitted once finalized and had an independent review before those discussions about the charitable status start with Charity Commission. I would have assumed so, but as yet, obviously we need to agree those timelines with my colleagues in legal to ensure that it doesn't jeopardize those discussions about the charitable status.
Sorry, just on the timing, there's no financial penalties, I often think, because this weekend's a self-assessment deadline, is it, for example, where there's no financial penalty in not submitting these accounts?
No, it's one, the trust isn't even a registered company or a charity, so any taxation liability wouldn't necessarily be there. I think the charity, and I'm sure Helen could kind of come in and clarify this a bit better, that the Charity Commission have asked to get these accounts, and know there's been a delay, as soon as possible, as we've kind of determined them and produced them in the right format, this is what we are trying to do. But as far as we know, there is no financial liability to be assessed, and there's no taxation liability as per se at the moment.
Chair, shall I come in at this point? I think there are a few points where I may be able to help a bit. First of all, picking up on Shabana's point in terms of the timing, the accounts, up-to-date accounts, are one of the things that the Charity Commission have asked us to produce as a condition of them regularising the charity's status. Which they're doing alongside updating the objectives of the trust, and also looking at the CPRE application. So all these things, the Charity Commission are looking at a number of things at the same time, but the accounts are part of that. And in terms of timing, a real deadline for the trust is beginning of April. Which is if we don't get Charity Commission approval by then we will have to begin the application process again. Now that's not, some might say that's not deadly, but it will set the timetable of the whole project back. So it sets the whole regeneration of the trust property and putting it on a financially sound status is all delayed, and also does potentially put at greater risk our partnership, the trust partnership with Masscraft. So we do really need to get things resolved by then, and because the Charity Commission aren't generally the fastest at turning things around, we do really need to get things, get response and supporting documentation to them quite quickly. Just moving across to pick up Councillor Taylor's queries about the bid. Just in case, I recognise, as local government and bureaucrats, we can fall into acronym speak. The bid is the Business Improvement District. And all businesses in the Central Ealing Business District are balloted. I forget how often, I think it's about every 5 years, as to whether or not they want the bid to continue. And if there's a majority in favour, then the bid is renewed for the, I think it's a 5-year period, it might be 4. And all businesses, whether they voted for it or not, if the majority is in favour, then the bid continues, and there's a levy imposed on all the businesses, and the bid company is independent of the council, and it works to promote the interests of the bid area. So the trust and the council would both benefit from the promotional work that the bid company does. But you're either in or you're out. If there is an Ealing bid, in effect, if the ballot is in favour, then the council will be obliged to pay the business levy, the bid levy, and the trust should properly pay a fair share towards that levy. I hope that apologies for those who already knew all that, but it might just might help.
Chair, can I just quickly come back? Sorry. I know when I was in cabinet, I asked around obviously business as an actor, so in the process work. But I'm just clarifying: did Friends of it? Did we as the trust therefore have a vote in that process? Because we would be more.
I can answer that. I can answer that quickly and easily. The trust property sits within the town hall building, as you know. In fact, the council owns the freehold underneath it. It's this weird arrangement where, and the council has always owned the land. The trust, which is the council, owns the building. So the council has historically exercised the vote. The building is one. Sorry, somebody's got some rather younger children online. Cancel the ball, child. Yeah, so the vote for the building of which the trust property forms part has been exercised by the council historically, and I think for rating purposes it would be, I think, impossible to split the two. I'm not a rating expert, but I don't think it would be possible to rate the building and have the trust exercise its voting powers separately from those of the council.
Sorry, I was just going to add on. I think, yeah, Helen, you're right in terms of that's how the revenues team had explained, hence the reason why the business rates and the bid levy amount can't be split for trust purposes to qualify for any potential relief. I think the only thing I was going to add, and Councillor Taylor, was with regards to any other taxation. Whilst we're seeking advice on VAT, at the same time we're also asking if there's any other potential taxation liability that we should take into account that trust may fall into. So to kind of give us the assurance that if we are submitting the accounts, that we're kind of ensuring all taxation liabilities taken into account.
Councillor Rice, you had a question.
Thank you. Yes, I'll get my page up. Yes, so I'm just looking at the Ealing Town Hall income and expenditure summary, and I just what this one thing that did catch my eye. I just thought I'd get some clarification over, is that gas has gone up over the year, but the gas expenditure 29,000 to 37,000. While electricity has gone down from 77,000 to 49,000. I just thought I'd try and clarify as to how that can be, because it would just seem to me that if the electricity usage had gone down dramatically, that seems to suggest a less use of the premises. So I'm trying to work out why gas has gone up so just so noticeably. And also, if I can just raise, I think this might have come up before at a previous meeting, but I think Ms. Brown's point about photocopying. As to why the photocopying is quite so high over this period as well, please. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of the utilities, without me kind of probably assessing the overall liability, just in terms of how the council will account for it in their particular year. So and it may have been a couple of years ago. So, you know, we have a contract for all our buildings through a company called Laser, and part of that there may be some backdating in a particular year that wasn't accounted for the year before, so hence why 18-19 may look higher, and maybe if we were to go back and look at the previous year they might have looked a bit lower. So it's probably catching up in that respect, and hence why it's gone down. But I can kind of confirm once I've kind of checked it. That would be my assertion to it. With regards to, I think, the other one, the gas element, I would say the same thing. It could be just a timing difference in terms of when the accounts were closed, and if it's not material, we may not accrue for it. But as you can imagine, the council has a multi-million pound worth of expenditure, and we have to kind of close our accounts by a certain deadline, and therefore any items that fall below a certain value that are not deemed material may not be represented in that year, and may be, you know, incurred in the year after, and that could be a reason. But again, I'll probably need to look at it, and like some of the previous questions around staffing that Adam and I were going to take back, we can kind of get those responses back to yourself. Around photocopying charges, it's just a I don't know without kind of going into the detail, but there's a charge to the Ealing Town Hall, which is a fixed cost, and that photocopying charges is not really about the actual, it's if the town hall, which it does have photocopiers, and it's the maintenance cost of operating them. So whether they're used or not, there will be a photocopier for which we'll have to pay a contractual fee, and that would be an element that's charged to the town hall. It has not changed. It's been fixed for years. As I understand, maybe the photocopiers haven't necessarily changed. This may change obviously going forward as the building kind of becomes less used, and we're looking at becoming more efficient as a council as a whole. So it would be in the council's advantage to we'll be looking at those costs anyway. But I would say at this time I won't know any further than that, and it will be something that we can ask the facilities team that manage the Ealing Town Hall site premises itself.
Thank you. Thanks everything. Thank you.
Councillor Ball, you had another question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, on that last one, I suspect some of the photocopiers might not even be there anymore. We might still be paying for stuff that doesn't exist. But anyway, what I was going to ask about, yeah, it arose out of answers to some of the previous questions that touched on charitable status. There seemed to be what seemed to be being said was that we don't have charitable status as we haven't fully registered yet. But surely the charity, we as a trust, have been a charity since the year dot, and that never went away. So although we're unregistered, we're still a charity. And I mean, I know that it's possible for unregistered charities to register with, to fill in a form and make themselves known to HMRC, so that they do benefit from certain tax advantages of being a charity, even if they are unregistered by the Charity Commission. So I think I'd like an answer to that, but it may be, if there isn't an immediate answer, that may be something that needs looking at in terms of whether we can, as a timing thing, whether we can already get some of the benefits of being a charity even before we are registered by the Charity Commission.
I'll answer as far as I can at this point in time. In terms of the actual cost share, there's no benefit because that's a cost share and that's a supply. In terms of taxation at the moment is the VAT element, and the advice being sought is on the basis that that the trust is an unregistered charity, and hence what can be done, and you're right, and hence that's why we kind of seeking, because it's not as straightforward, because there's no a formal agreement set up. So it's almost like something that's always happened in terms of the arrangement, and it's trying to kind of get the VAT advice based on that. I mean, obviously going forward, when it does get its charitable status, all of this will need to kind of be looked at independently to ensure that the setup arrangement for the trust as a charity and the governance is very clear in terms of its potential tax liability, what it can or can't necessarily do. Does that answer your question, Councillor Paul?
Yes, thank you. Yes, thanks.
Thank you, everyone. I know there were a couple of concerns raised about the independent review, and just for all trustees, if we're going to get an independent firm to do an independent review of these accounts, apart from checking the arithmetic, we can also stipulate that we want them to look at the methodology and the application of that methodology, and they'll have to report on that as well. So, we can get it to do whatever we want. So there's nobody else indicating that they would like to ask a question. So Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, yeah, just on that last point, really. I was about to ask you, perhaps you knew any accountants, but that would be unfair. We'd want to know the cost, wouldn't we, if an independent review? I mean, I have no idea how much it will be, so.
Yeah, it will be a cost, and we would try and look for the most efficient, cost-efficient way through our procurement process to ensure that we can. But it won't, whatever firm you kind of get and whatever you stipulate, it would be a timing, and it is something that will have to be added to the deficit. I mean, there's already costs that we haven't necessarily, about the VAT advice. I don't know what that will be, because I'm waiting for quotes to kind of come in and a decision to be made whether the cost will be something the council is willing to kind of accept, or would be including within the accounts, just to be transparent that there's a cost there. But yeah, it will be an added cost, and I'm sure Adam can kind of, from a trustee's representative perspective, kind of add a bit more to it.
Yeah, thanks, Shabana. Just briefly, as you say there, I think ultimately, obviously it's for you as trustees to form a view, but I think if the view is you'd like to approve that recommendation for the independent review, as Shabana says, well, clearly we'll try to carry that out, to commission that in a cost-effective way. But it does seem like a potentially a sensible thing to do, and I'll obviously need to square that away with the council in terms of the point we've already made about the deficit, which is already a discussion that will have to be had. So hopefully that's helpful, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Shaw.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think Adam has actually just sort of covered off what I was going to say, which basically I think an independent review would be helpful of it all for the trustees, so that we have that sort of reassurance, if you like, that backstop that the accounts have been looked at in detail. And also in terms of the cost, perhaps I could just ask, bearing in mind there's already a £327,000 deficit that the trust has, it's not going to be too significant in terms of the ongoing deficit that the trust is running up, I wouldn't have thought.
I think just to respond to that briefly, Councillor Shaw, yeah, I think that's essentially right, as you say, and I think, well, I would hope that, again, I'll need to have the conversation with colleagues in the council, but I'm not hearing pushback from the council's side, so to speak, that we wouldn't be able to arrange for that on the trust's behalf, accepting that will potentially push up that deficit. And as I say, it just makes it part of that conversation I need to have. So yes, you're right to put it in that way.
Yes, so if I could just come in then about the conversation that you're then going to have with sort of other council officers, sort of making you representing us, if you like, Adam, which you are doing a terrific job at, and thank you for that. I think the next stages are perhaps, where the next meeting might be held where we could possibly see these discussions and how it's taking shape. And I think that becomes more important for sorting out the deficit of the trust going forward. I don't know if other members of the committee agree with me or not on that.
Certainly. So I'm sure your colleagues may want to respond, Councillor, but I think from my point of view, and again, it's so yes, and sort of similar point to my response to Councillor Taylor's is I'd like to. There's a number of things I intend to come back to you on in due course, and obviously that deficit is one of them. I think, you know, as we've sort of touched on in this meeting, I think there's a lot of work to be done to sort of look, you know, as I say, sort of ideally look forward to how the project might work in the future, how the question that was asked, I think, by Dippy earlier about the events team, and you know, as an example, I would like to negotiate with the council's events team for them to make an offer to the trust for the future arrangement, for example. And I think, as has been mentioned earlier, it might be quite nice for them to come and present to you and make you an offer, so to speak. So I think there's a number of areas where we'd like to come back to you in due course. I think on the specific one about the deficit, yeah, in mind, I'd like to come back to you at a later date with a sort of a bit more detail around the sort of the overall framework and the financial picture. The challenge, as you'll appreciate, that we've got at the moment is that we are in somewhat of a limbo position because of where we stand with the Charity Commission. So it has been very difficult to look forward because we're so sort of really focused on these very immediate issues, and which I'm sure we'll come on to in a minute. So that's been, I suppose, a bit of a challenge in being able to come to you with some of those forward-looking points, which includes kind of hopefully resolving the issue of the deficit. Is that, you know, we are somewhat, although hopefully not for too much longer, it's sort of in that sort of position that we are at the moment. But yes, there's lots that should be coming to you in the future, I hope.
That's great, thank you.
You wanted to make another point?
Yeah, just very quickly. I think, as most people seem to be agreeing, that a one-off investment in an independent review to get the basis of accounting right is probably worth doing at this early stage. I just wondering, and maybe we expect that the cost of that might be shared between the trust and the council, given that the outcome of the review would provide assurance to both the council and the trust.
I see Councillor Ball's thumb going up as well, Ian. I think that's certainly something I'm happy to take away and discuss with council colleagues, but seems like a reasonable position to take.
Okay, thanks.
So I'll take that away.
Okay, thank you very much. So on 1.1, recommendations 1.1 to 1.4, are we happy to agree those?
Agreed.
Yes, agreed, Chair.
Agreed.
So 1.5, Councillor Sumner, you said you had a question.
Can't hear. You've gone very faint again.
Councillor Sumner, you had a question on recommendation 1.5?
I do indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Look, further to the oral update on the Charity Commission's letter, can I support the Charity Commission's request that the majority of trustees should be non-councillors? Can I ask for a vote on this request, please? Can we hear you?
Sorry, Councillor Sumner.
Yes.
Can you just say that again, please? I was just going through the agenda again.
I'm only too happy to. So, Chair, thank you. So, further to the oral update on the Charity Commission's letter, can I support the Charity Commission's request that the majority of trustees should be non-councillors? And can I ask for a vote on this request, Chair? Thank you.
So I was going to ask Adam to speak briefly on 1.5, but as Adam's already mentioned, we had that response from the Charity Commission, I think, very shortly before these papers were published.
Yes.
And I believe we are going to, well, I wanted to ask if members
I'm
would
happy to give a summary, Chair. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, if you want to do that first, and then I'll go on to next steps.
Apologies, Chair. Yes, I just thought, given it was there. And,
so, Chair, do you agree to a vote, or are you going to come to that later?
Can we come to it later, Councillor Sumner? Just because I wanted to make some points on that.
Chair, yeah, apologies, and I'll keep it brief. It was simply I thought it was helpful just for me to give, as the recommendation states, a brief oral update, but conscious of time, I will keep it brief. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, and you've just acknowledged, Chair, the Charity Commission response arrived sort of immediately before the dispatch date for the papers, so hence a very swift addition to the recommendations, and we haven't been able to put anything further in the report body itself. I think all I'd briefly say, just some key points from their correspondence. I think from the Charity Commission's point of view, they are, just as a brief reminder for trustees, it's a response that was issued to a letter from Councillor Nagpal from December of last year, which we shared with you at the last meeting. So that is what they're responding to, which in itself was a response to the Charity Commission's decision review of last April, where the Charity Commission had outlined a range of issues that they had identified with the application for the scheme for the trust. So the letter that we've received it broadly indicates that the Trust has satisfied the vast majority of the issues that the Charity Commission had raised in the decision review from last year. So it sort of point by point sort of acknowledges in a number of cases that those matters have been satisfied. The key point, and it sort of talks to Councillor Sumner's item there, the sort of key issue is to the end of the Charity Commission's letter, where they confirm that they would want to see more by way of work to address the conflict of interest point. I think it's fair to say we as officers haven't yet been able to, we're sort of in discussions and taking external legal advice on that, and aren't really in a position to come back to you today with sort of a full set of recommendations and a view on that. But obviously very happy, Chair, to take any questions that you and colleagues might want to put to us on that. Very last point I'll make before I hand back to you, Chair, is I think Helen mentioned it earlier, but just to emphasise, it's actually the 2nd of April of this year is when the Charity Commission say that arrangements need to be formalised. So that's obviously a key deadline sort of in many respects. So Chair, hopefully that's just sort of a helpful summary, and happy to hand back to you for any questions.
Thank you, Adam. I did want to go back to Councillor Sumner, but what I'll do is I'll wait for Helen, who said she wants to make a point in relation to Councillor Sumner's suggestion.
Chair, I'm happy to make my point, but I don't know whether, I know Ian wanted to speak on this point as well by the looks of the chat. So I think Ian, Mr. Patterson said, so I wondered whether it would be helpful for Ian to speak first, and then it could be,
I'd like to, but I think there are a few people ahead of me in the queue,
yes,
actually. So could
That's why I thought I'd let Helen go first, but we can go through.
Apologies, Chair. Yeah.
No, but then you can pick up everything in one go.
The point I was going to make, Chair, is that the Charity Commission have actually raised some quite broad points, a number of issues about the trust. The majority of independent members is one of the suggestions they made, but they also have asked suggested that the council actually set up a completely separate trust body to represent the council as trustee, rather than doing it via GPC. So my query was, obviously I'm not a member of this committee, I'm only your advisor, but I wondered whether maybe you might consider taking all these decisions together rather than simply voting in relation to a majority of independent trustees. I think that maybe there are that's simply one question within a number of linked points, and to take that completely separately from the issue of whether or not to set up a separate trust body might be simply doing one bit of the jigsaw rather than the whole.
Shaw? Oh, sorry, is it Councillor Ball? I think Councillor Ball's first, sorry. I'm just working through them in order.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Chair. I agree with Helen that it's a wider issue than Councillor Sumner framed it as, because I think what the Charity Commission are saying is that in order to avoid a conflict of interest, there should be a majority of independent members who are not conflicted. And as I understand it, I'm sure Helen will tell me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, a council committee can't have, it wouldn't be possible for it to have independent voting members on it. So if we want to go beyond the non-voting independent members we have now to having a situation where there's a majority that are non-councillors, we would need to move to having a separate board of trustees. So the sort of model that we have for Pitshanger Manor, for instance, where there is a separate board which have some council involvement, but the majority are independent people who are entirely concerned with the objects of the trust, as opposed to having the conflict as being councillors with one hat and trustees as another. So it seems to me that what we should be looking at is just slightly broader than appointing extra independent trustees, but the broader point of setting up a real standalone trust body.
Councillor Shaw?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think Helen has actually covered sort of some of the points I was going to make in a very broad approach. I think that this is coming back to some of the points that were raised already, that Councillor Taylor mentioned as well about the overall regulation, and I think that should all be taken as a whole, because it makes sense for it all to be looked at and to be decided on, perhaps without wanting to push more work onto Adam, unfortunately, but a regulation sort of paper, if you like, going forward as to how the trust operates and so on, and that's something we can consider at a future meeting.
Tippy, you wanted to raise a question? You had a question?
Yes, I did, Chair. I think some of the questions I had have already been raised by various people, and Helen has responded to some of what I was going to raise. But it is just to reiterate what councillors are saying, that my concern was in point 4 that appointing 2 independent trustees, as Ian and myself, I wondered if the Charity Commission knew we were non-voting, and whether 2 non-voting trustees were going to actually address this whole issue of conflict of interest, and whether we need to think of a slightly more radical rethink on how the trustees are formed and what they make up. And that was the point I was going to raise, but I think everybody else is across raising that as well.
Ian, you had a question?
Yes, yeah, thanks. I think first of all, just to say, I think on the letter as a whole, I know we're focusing on point 4, but on the letter as a whole, I think there's a lot of good news in this letter, and a lot of progress has been made on many other points. So we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we've travelled a long way in terms of discussion with the Commission. On point 4, a very specific question. I'm slightly confused about situations in which councillors will be conflicted. Who decides that? Is it the trust? Is it our advisors? Is it the councillors themselves? And how do we identify those circumstances? But just again to say, I do think we ought to resolve this in some shape or form acceptable to the Commission before the 2nd of April. There's great benefit in that. So there is a bit of time, but time is pressing. And I do think it would be useful if we could get something back, perhaps from Adam and Helen, just on some of the options with the kind of advantages and disadvantages of potential responses back to the trust, so we can make a decision in that timescale. That might mean a swift meeting before the next meeting on the 1st of April, but I think that might be well spent if we can just knock the final Charity Commission related issue on the head.
Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, thanks. I think Councillor Sumner's been slightly mischievous and trying to reduce it all to 1.4 and asking us to vote ourselves into oblivion here, I think. I'll agree with Councillor Shaw, actually. I think we have to look at, and Helen Harris as well, we have to look at everything in the round. So that's my point. I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So, I mean, on 1.5, I was going to suggest that we delegate to Adam, and who can consult with myself and Helen on this, just because there's not a lot of time. Or we could call, and, you know, if necessary, we could call another meeting. But, you know, we could just call another meeting, but it's just given the amount of time we have, it's not a lot of time, and there's a lot of work for officers to do. But certainly if there was going to be another meeting, you know, any voting on all the issues that have been raised by the Charity Commission could always be done at that meeting. Helen?
Yes, Chair. I'm not offering. I mean, obviously, it's for the committee to decide how you want to deal with this. If we're going to have another meeting, it does need to be pretty soon, within the next 2 or 3 weeks. So I would just ask for the support of members to clear their diaries to prioritise this, because, as I said, we need to get a response back to the Charity Commission very, very swiftly. If we're going to set up a separate body within the time period, that would need to go to full council on the 2nd of March. So everything needs to be well back from there. It's all doable, but we just, you know, we would need to focus and prioritise this work, and as I said, that includes not only officers prioritising it, but as I said, members finding space in what I know are very busy diaries.
I mean, how do members feel about delegating?
Could you make sure that's in the minutes? My request for a vote. Could you make sure it's in the minutes, please? Thank you.
Yes, of course, Councillor.
I think it's my right to ask that, I think.
Yes, of course, and you've raised it, so it will be minuted, Councillor.
Thank you, Mrs. Harris, for your help there.
How do members feel about delegating to Adam, who could work in consultation with Helen and myself, and then, you know, we could always call another meeting at that stage if necessary, just given the time.
Can I speak on that? Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. I mean, delegating the detailed discussion of, you know, coming forward with a plan for you know, the future structure is fine, or maybe even options for future structure. But I do think we definitely need to come back and have a meeting to decide it, because it is, you know, probably one of the most important decisions in the Trust's long history. You know, deciding whether to you know, whether to continue as a role of a council committee, or whether to set up a new structure. So I think you know, I think we definitely need to come back with another meeting where we as a committee can come to a view on the way forward. Absolutely.
You wanted to speak on that point?
Just, I think I agree with the last point, is the point I wanted to make. I'm very happy, obviously, to get options and suggestions from Adam and Helen, but I think given how fundamental the decision is, and I kind of say this as a non-voting member, I think it's important that, you know, the Trust makes the decision on the way forward on this. So I'd endorse that.
Does anyone else have anything to add on?
You've disappeared again, Chair.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
No, you've got to get louder.
I just wondered if anyone else had any.
That's better.
If anyone else had anything that they wanted to add on that.
No,
delegate, whether we delegate or whether we come back and have another meeting.
I wouldn't like to be mischievous though with Councillor Taylor.
Well,
Councillor Taylor, did you?
Well, you know, he said that. I think there is a point about diary commitments, and I think if you do decide to vote to have another meeting, just ask your members what time, because even 6 o'clock, I'll be honest, I may be working from home, but I'm having to literally go for one work meeting straight into this. So a bit of slightly delayed start would be helpful if you are going to go for another meeting.
It's good to see you, Councillor.
You too, Councillor Sumner.
Excellent. Nothing wrong with the hearing then. Good.
Okay, well, given that members feel it's quite an important decision, then perhaps we should come back and have another meeting.
Agreed.
Agreed.
So Chair, Keith will get cracking sharpish to find a date, sort of 2 or 3 weeks hence, and
Yep.
Adam and I will, with support of other colleagues, will start working immediately on the report for that.
Yep. Thanks, Helen.
Okay, so what's next? Item 7 says the next meeting is the 1st of April, but I guess we'll be meeting before that. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody.
Chair, will you take comments on the minutes? I know that we went through the minutes and agreed them, but there is a paragraph there that's down to me. Will you take a comment on that, or you'd rather not? I don't have a problem.
We have already agreed the minutes, Councillor Sumner, but
it's fine. I don't have a problem with it, but it was the question from me on regulatory issues, which Councillor Taylor did edge on during one of his contributions.
Shall I end the meeting?
I did.
Who wants to end the meeting, sorry?
Well, sorry, I thought we'd finished the meeting, and I was asking if it needed to be, because it's still going out live at the moment.
I don't mind. You can close the meeting.
And I mean, this is the point that Councillor Sumner raised at the last meeting, so I guess it doesn't really matter. But
it doesn't really matter. Oh, right.
No. What I mean is whether we're live or not, because it's something you raised at the last meeting. So,
yeah.
But I thought you had. I thought Helen had replied to
if
you
want to say goodbye to Keith and we come off the meeting, I'll give you a response if you like.
Okay. All right.
Okay with you? Thank you, Chair.
Okay. I'm closing the meeting.